Hey everyone, it's February 27, 2014, and right now we're going to be talking about the Galaxy S5 and what it means for the iPhone 5S and the iPhone 6. We're talk about the iWatch, we're going to talk about the Apple TV, and we're going to talk all about the Loop's tribute to Steve Jobs. This is the iMore Show. Joining me today, we have the managing editor of iMore.com and Kaiju fanboy, apparently, Peter Cohen. How are you, Peter?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
For people not familiar with Kaiju, that includes every form of giant monster from Godzilla to Mothra to King Kong and back, correct?
Yes, you, Jason Snell, and I, and a few other people on Twitter have been involved in sort of a cross-conversation about Kaiju in light of the new Godzilla trailer that debuted on the internets this week. And I, for one, am a fan of any giant monster. Movie, TV show, comic book, it doesn't matter. I happen to adore giant monsters.
What about me?
Well,
that's one of the reasons why I love you so much, Jim, because you're a giant monster.
I was actually going to ask, and this is Jim Dalrymple, editor-in-chief of The Loop, loopinsight.com, if you would have considered Steve Ballmer in his heyday a Godzilla-like monster.
No.
I still do myself.
How are you doing, Jim?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. The last time we spoke to you, you had just relaunched the Loop magazine. You'd gotten in with some very bad people, and by that I meant Chris Harris and his Glide platform.
Yes,
and you'd made a wonderful new app.
Just like being with the Mafia or something, those guys.
The British designer Mafia. And now you've just put out, which I think is one of your, I don't know what the right word is, but one of your, at least one of the most personal issues, as far as I'm concerned. It was a tribute to Steve Jobs on his birthday, I guess about 2.5 years after he passed away.
Yeah. It was, I worked on that issue since last August, I think. It was a kind of a personal issue. I wanted to do something just to kind of show my respect for Steve. So this is what I came up with, and I thought it was really nice.
You had some amazing writers, amazing people, frankly, contribute. You had Don Melton, who people might know, created WebKit and Safari for Apple under Scott Forstall, Bertrand Serlet, and of course Steve Jobs. He had 2 stories in there. There was Matt Gemmel's story. Matthew Modine, I believe, contributed a story. How is it getting all those people together? And did you give them any guidelines? Did you just let them loose?
Really, I just let them loose. I mean, what I wanted was for everybody to kind of come up with their own thoughts. Matthew Modine about playing Scully in the Jobs movie. And, Matt Gemmell is just a fantastic writer. And for him to contribute what Steve meant for him, and all of us, really, for that matter. And I thought that they all did a great job.
It was both heartbreaking in some ways and funny in others. Like, for example, Melton said at one point he yelled across at Bud Tribble going, "When you're done with that guy, come talk to your old friends." And, of course, we could figure out, who that guy was, right?
Yeah, it was so funny. I mean, because he couldn't see Steve, and Bud was just ignoring him. So, yeah, come on over here when you're done with that guy. And then Steve turned around and, that guy was Steve. So, funny stuff.
You can just picture Melton sitting back down going, "I'm so fired."
Yeah, if I wasn't in charge of this Safari thing.
So how's the new version of the Loop magazine working for you? You've been doing it for several months now this way. Is it what you hoped it would be?
Yeah. I mean, there's still some things that we have to change and improve, but that's software development. There are always things that have to change and improve. I'm always amazed with Chris and Matthias because I'll email them and say, I really want to be able to do this. And they say, well, that's already in there. So it's just putting the code in for me to activate it, and it's done. So, that's a great thing to be able to do that. And they're very attentive and very detail-oriented in making sure that everything is right for the user, So that's where we are.
Yeah, Chris was kind enough to come on. He went on both Iterate and Vector to explain a little bit about the technology and also his feelings about media moving forward. And it seems to me this is all part of his secret plan to create a modern hypercard for the digital age.
Yeah, it is amazing what this is able to do, and just the feeling that you get from it when you're swiping and when you're navigating through the app. It's kind of like what we think of Apple, that when you think of the simplest thing to do something, and that's usually how it's done with Apple, and that's what I find with the magazine too. That it's usually the simplest way.
So the sort of the big question I wanted to ask you about all this is about Steve Jobs, and obviously you can't say that Steve Jobs, that Apple without Steve Jobs is the same, because that would be saying that Steve Jobs never really mattered to Apple, and he mattered a great deal. But it is the post-Steve Jobs era. There's going to be some books coming out about that. It's been a couple of years. What are your thoughts now on sort of the post-Steve Jobs era at Apple?
Well, it seems to me that Apple is staying the course. I mean, the one thing that Steve made sure he did this time is leave Apple in really good hands. With Tim Cook and Phil Schiller, Johnny Ive. I mean, they know Steve's philosophies. When Steve passed, if Apple had all of a sudden released 5 iPhone models and 20 different computers, and then I'd be a bit worried.
If they did what the analysts said they should do, then we should start worrying.
But Apple seems to be, rightfully so, ignoring the analysts and ignoring mainstream media like Forbes. Well,
I found out about that. Apparently, almost anyone can go and get one of those contributor things. It's their sort of citizen blogging platform. And some of us think that it's the same as Forbes writing it, but it's really just someone writing a comment on a message board somewhere.
Yeah, I wouldn't allow that. I really wouldn't. Those guys are
horrible.
Horrible, yeah.
Well, they're trying to sell it now, too.
Yeah, forget that.
Because of all the traffic that stuff is driving. Good luck.
Well, it drives traffic because it's so bad.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, that's one of the, and I don't know if it's one of the consequences of the internet. And this goes back to when they used to do Nielsen by hand, and you'd fill it out. Everyone said they watched PBS, but when they actually measured what you watched on the box, it was never PBS. It was like PMZ or something. It was like the worst reality TV. It was the worst stuff. And I think on the internet, all of us, like whether you read it because you think it's interesting or you read it because it fills you with rage, they found this model that gives you sort of that will get away with your boredom. It'll feed some sort of need you have, either to be outraged or whatever it is. That's my guess why it works, at least.
Yeah, well, it's like driving by an accident. Everybody slows down to have a look.
Peter, what's your take on Apple after Steve Jobs? I mean, everyone. It seems like this is like what would Steve do, or this would never have happened if Steve Jobs or Wozniak or whoever insert the name here was still alive. It seems like we're starting to get past that, but it's still sort of something hanging around.
Yeah, it's still something sort of hanging around. I'm afraid it's going to be the anchor around Tim Cook's neck forever. Because he's not Steve Jobs, and I don't know what or if he's ever going to be able to do to shake that, unless Apple's able to come up with a disruptive product that just completely reinvents the world again. And even then, they'll probably be second guessing that if Steve had launched this product, it would have been better, or some features would have been in there, and so on. That's the problem, is that it's a moving target every time. For the analysts and the pundits and just the dumbasses with Forbes accounts.
You can call them tech bloggers. We don't mind.
Oh yeah, that too. That come up with this stuff. It's a constantly moving target. So, my own opinion, of Apple post Steve Jobs is that they've more or less stayed the course. They haven't come out with any major brilliance in the past 2.5 years. But they've iteratively improved every product in their matrix, and they've done some pretty amazing things. The Mac Pro, which you and I always talk about, is a great example.
Which you want to marry.
Which I do. If polygamy with machines was legal in my state, which it isn't, it's something that I think even a year before it was introduced would have been pretty hard to conceive of. Yet there it is, and it's out in the world. And what's more, it's being built in the U.S., which is something that that never would have happened under Steve Jobs' watch.
Well, some people say that. I mean, that's a valid point. Some people say, under Steve Jobs, Apple wouldn't have made public their charitable doubling program. They wouldn't have gotten so involved with the equal with equal rights and sort of gay rights issues. That
Yeah,
there's a lot
no,
of things that are new about Apple.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. There are a lot of things that are new with Apple, and there are a lot of things that are improved. And I mean, that's not just when it comes to Apple's public stance on those issues. It comes with the sort of the change of management that's happened at Apple since Steve's passing. The departure of Scott Forstall, for example, and everything that's gone along with that. So Tim's definitely made his mark on the company. There's no question.
Jim, some people have said that under Steve Jobs, for example, we wouldn't have had all that 30th anniversary of the Mac stuff, which I actually really enjoyed. So I'm not exactly certain that it's always a bad thing to have new people running companies.
I don't agree with that. I think we would have seen 30th anniversary of the Mac. We saw some 20th anniversary of the Mac when
That's true.
Steve was still there. So I think we would have seen 32. People just like to hear themselves talk. They like to say, "Oh, well, if Steve were alive." You know what? Shut up.
Well, if I'd been playing that hockey game last night, the Bees never would have lost in sudden death overtime, Jim.
No, hockey ended when Canada walked away with 2 medals. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Yeah, that's right.
That's all we needed for this season.
Wow.
All right, so transitioning a little bit, we had Mobile World Congress this week, and if anyone didn't see it, basically it was a machine gun assault of Android devices on the world. It got everything from a new Samsung Galaxy S5 to Nokia's Nokia X Android phones. There was new Sony phones. There was new phones from everybody. Basically every phone that could possibly be imagined, 3 versions of it came out. And the interesting thing for me, Jim, is after watching for a while, I can remember when the iPhone 4S came out, people said Apple's boring. And the iPhone 5 came out. They re-engineered the whole thing from the atom up, and people said it's boring. It's still a round rectangle. Oh, iPhone 5S, it's boring. That seems to be happening to Samsung now, too. The Galaxy S4 was called the Galaxy S3S. The Galaxy S5 is now being called the Galaxy S4S. And I wonder if people are finally starting to realize that when you make incredibly popular, incredibly successful phones, the revolutions are accompanied by years of evolution.
Well, I think what people have to realize is that innovation and change don't necessarily mean a better product. I mean, you can say that the iPhone 5 is just like, or the 5S is just like the 5. It's not. There are a lot of things that have changed. And would you want Apple to change the design of the iPhone 5 just for the sake of change? No, because that would be stupid. And then people would say, well, this is stupid.
They say they want it, but then they would hate it.
That's right. It's just like the iWatch. What were all the the stupid media people, and analysts, they were all saying, oh yeah, Apple should release an iWatch. We really want a watch. We want a watch. And then what happened? Samsung released a watch, and it sucked. And they all hated it because it's stupid. You don't do things like that.
Peter, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the sort of thing that we're doing now is that we're before a new phone is announced, we're anticipating it, we're projecting upon it the sum total of all our science fiction fantasies. Sometimes they have no correlation to economics or even physics in the universe that we know it. And then we set ourselves up so that we can anticipate it and then complain about it the minute it's released.
Well, you know what part of that's going to be? That's why Apple can surprise us. Because we can't think as far in advance as what Apple can, and we don't know what technologies and things that they're what they're using. So they're going to come out with something that we will be surprised with, I hope.
You've described the news cycle regarding new products from Apple to, and not just Apple, but increasingly other companies as well, to a T. The nature abhors a vacuum, and so do tech bloggers. So anytime there's a vacuum in the news cycle, they're going to fill it with whatever fantasy they can. And when those fantasies don't pan out, especially when it's a meme that a whole bunch of people sort of collectively decide is a good idea, like the iWatch should be a blood glucose monitor, or the iPhone 5 will be teardrop shaped, or whatever it might be. then it gives us the illusion that there's consensus about what this product should be. And if the product doesn't meet those expectations, then it's suddenly a disappointment. Now, I don't think that we do that specifically. When you said we before, I think you were talking collectively.
The human race.
Yeah, the human race. And I don't think we specifically do that, any of the people in the room here. But it is definitely a problem, and it's a consistent pattern of behavior that goes back, well before Twitter came on the scene, well before Facebook came on the scene. This is something that has dogged the tech press for almost as long as there's been a tech press, and as long as companies haven't been talking to the tech press with as much clarity as the tech press would like them to.
What's interesting to me, and you guys have been covering this way longer than I have, is that whether you ascribe, Steve Jobs being there or not, people look at the past with rose-colored glasses. I remember when the iPod came out, people, that famous quote, lame. When the iPhone came out, it can't do MMS, lame. When the iPad came out, just a big iPhone, lame. There seems to be, no matter who is driving it or what, these are now considered revolutionary products, the likes of which Apple has not released in a couple of years. But at the time, they were derided by a large part of people of the press as being unimaginative. It seems like it's one of those, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't situations anyway.
That's absolutely accurate, for sure. I don't know, Jim, do you want to add anything to that? Because I really can't think of.
I think people need to let Tim Cook and Phil and Johnny and all of the people at Apple just do their thing. I mean, to have somebody like a reporter for the Wall Street Journal say, well, this is what Apple has to do, and list off 5 things that Apple should do. I'm sorry, you're a writer. You're not qualified to run a $1 billion company. And until you are, just shut the hell up. There's no need for your lips to be moving when you're barely qualified to hold down, a $60,000 a year job.
Are you taking keyboards away again, Jim?
And Tim Cook is running a multi-billion-dollar company.
The interesting thing, and you mentioned like the glucose reader and the iWatch, I think, and Peter and I have debated this offline too, is that people who cover Apple don't necessarily understand Apple, and that's true for analysts and for reporters and for Wall Street investors, because it seems to me like, for example, the rumors now about the iWatch, whether it has a glucose monitor, there are people saying, oh, it's impossible. I've talked to doctors, that can't happen. But it seems to me that those are people who are thinking of the iWatch in terms of one watch, when Apple almost never does that. Apple does, product lines. The original iPhone didn't do 3G. That's not to say the iPhone as a product would never do 3G. Original iPad didn't have a camera. iPads now have cameras. Apple seems to look in terms of 2 years ahead, 3 years ahead, 4 years ahead, and a lot of times the coverage is focused on last year.
Who did you ask?
Oh, sorry, Jim. I was throwing it your way.
People, Samsung in particular, thought that the iWatch, or it was going to be a watch. So what did Samsung do? They brought out a watch, and it's silly. If I asked you too, and everybody that was watching this right now, to make a list of 10 things that you would want an iWatch to do, and then compare that list, 5 things even, compare that list to what Samsung put out for their what's that stupid thing called?
The original one was Galaxy Gear. Now they're just called the Gear.
Oh, so the Gear. Okay. Compare that to what the Gear does, and see if it matches your list. I almost guarantee you that it wouldn't, because I've done this. I've asked people what they would want. It doesn't match anybody's list. Why bother?
Well, that's that quote that Tim Cook did for Steve Jobs on his birthday, where he, that's the thing about the patience that Samsung as a company, I think Microsoft, you could say whether they're guilty of this or not, or took advantage or not, they were always a race to first, like someone on a blog comment saying, first! Exclamation point.
Yeah.
They wanted to get it out, and Apple is, really patient. They would, and I think we've talked about this before, but Apple didn't put out a phone immediately. I mean, they dabbled with phones for years, but they waited until the Trio was out and the BlackBerry was out, and they could see the problems and figure out what an Apple solution to those problems were. So like, Apple is almost never an early mover in new product categories. There was 10 years of pain in tablet PC before the iPad came out.
But they are, if you think about that in another way, Apple really is an early mover in those circles, because they're the ones that make it work. You know, like you said, the tablet wasn't, Apple didn't invent the tablet. I mean, the tablet has been around since Moses. Microsoft just made it worse. That's all. Then you have Apple that comes along and say, okay, you know, you're used to these tablets that are this thick and they weigh 20 pounds. Here's what we think the tablet should be. And, you know, they bring out the iPad. And it's gorgeous. It works. And, you know, people say that I'm biased for Apple. No. I like companies that make great things.
And your interests are aligned with Apple.
Apple right now makes great things. I like Gibson guitars. I like Fender guitars. They are great guitars. That's why I like those companies. That's why I continue to buy their thing, and that's why I continue to buy Apple stuff, because this stuff works.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair, but I think that goes to the patience that they have in the market. They would rather not release something than release something bad. I mean, some people in the chat are mentioning products like the Pippin, but that was pre-second era Jobs sort of product. The second era of Jobs, the recent modern history of Apple, is them being incredibly patient and only entering a category when they feel like they can do a great product that, you know, makes their customers happy. You think that's fair, Peter?
Yeah, no, I'd say that that's very fair, and you know, I agree with Jim. I partly anyway. You know, I am unabashedly an Apple fanboy. I'll give Apple the benefit of the doubt, even when they don't deserve it sometimes. As proof of that, I've had, you know, an account with with Mac.com since before it was Mac.com, you know, when it was still iTools, and suffered through all those years of Apple having really crappy cloud service. And, you know, some could say that Apple's cloud service is still pretty substandard when it comes to what Google gives you. So, you know, I probably am partial to Apple to a fault, but I recognize that at least when it comes to the way that I like to work, when it comes to the way that I like to use my devices, Apple has the ecosystem that is most compatible with my lifestyle and my workflow. And part of that is because my lifestyle and my workflow, you know, has sort of developed around that technology. So it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. It's kind of hard for me to separate out sometimes. But, you know, when I work in the Apple retailer that I do on the weekends, I hear from people all the time who come in with their first Mac, maybe coming in for repair, or they've got an iPad and they might have an iPhone, or they might have an iPhone, and they tell me time after time after time, this product changed my life. You know, this product is the best of this type of device that I've ever used. Or I had endless problems with my computer or my tablet or my phone before I switched to an Apple device, and now I don't. And that tells me that demonstrably these devices are better for lots of people. Does that mean that everybody should use them? No. You know, I would never be chauvinistic enough to tell anybody that they need an Apple product because it's just so far superior to anything else on the market. But I think that you know, when people approach it with an open mind, and when people are open to the experience, they tend to have a very positive experience that you don't with too many other products in the marketplace. I mean, you know, I think the only thing that I've got any kind of brand loyalty to with Apple is probably Gillette shaving products. You know.
You know what? People write me and say, you know, I'm a Windows user and I have an Android phone, and I want you to convince me why I should buy an Apple product. And I write back and say the same thing every time. No, I don't give a shit what you use. It doesn't matter to me. I'm going to use what I want. If you need somebody to convince you, then you're a moron.
Well, I think that yeah, no, I think that's absolutely fair because there'll never be one thing that, especially the way Apple operates. If you take for granted that Apple is focused, that they believe in doing a few things really really well than trying to do everything badly, then there'll always be people for whom those are just not the important things. There'll be people who just want a kind of application that won't run on the iPhone, or they want to be able to use a certain cable that doesn't exist in Apple's ecosystem, and that's fine. There's something else that they can use. But I think that hitting the mainstream market is what lets Apple sort of, and I've said this before, but anybody can go in and pick up one of those things. A lot of PCs you go and buy from Best Buy, you need your neighbor's kid to come help you set up, and come by weekly to help you keep virus clean. And they're a lot of work. Imagine getting a car and not knowing how to drive. These things are a lot of work. But Apple's done a really good job in making them, what you said before, Jim, the obvious way of using it is typically the way you use it.
Well, and it's not just going and buying a MacBook and coming home and it looks nice. It's the fact that you sign into to one account, and all of a sudden, all of your information is there that you had from your iPhone. Or you get your Mac, you set it all up, you go to the store, you buy an iPhone, type in your iCloud address, and boom, everything is there. Your music. You have access to all of your music with iTunes Match and iTunes in the cloud, and you have your addresses and your calendar and everything, and it's there for you. It's not an effort. It's not something where you have to say, I'm going to sync this. It's a decade, more than a decade of infrastructure that Apple set up. And if you think back to the beginning of the iPod and iTunes, when all of this launched, and the infrastructure that Apple set up, and the backing that it has now to support the services that it does put out, those are the things that I want. Having my documents from Pages and Numbers, all the payments I do for the magazine are all in Numbers. I can do that from my iPhone, my iPad, my Mac. It doesn't matter. When it's back up in the cloud, I can open it wherever I want. That's what I want. My documents and my data has to be available everywhere in order for all of this to make sense. If it's not going to make sense to people, and that's where the Android market is right now. The BlackBerry market, it doesn't even matter anymore. I mean, it's so ridiculous.
It's hurting me in my Canadian heart, Jim.
Yeah.
The one thing, though, so there are a couple things that I think, a lot of people will say Apple should do this, and I think that's always a terrible thing. I think it's okay to say this is the kind of thing I'd like to see next because, right now we're 6 months out probably from more products, and it's a nice time to dream. And there are things, for example, I love iCloud, but I would really wish that Apple would provide enough free storage to back up like if I buy an iPhone, let me back up that phone. If I buy an iPad as well, even if I put it on the same account, don't make me have to make a second account. Let me just back that up because the backup stuff is really not that huge. Or just store my photos. Don't delete them after 30 days. Or let me pay enough. Like I pay $100 a month now for 50 gigabytes, and I'm still close to that. Give me some option so that I can really throw everything at that cloud if I want to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, does Apple do everything that we want? No. But what happens when they step outside of, I guess, where they're comfortable? Well, that's when mistakes happen. We've had those mistakes. Apple has made those mistakes. They're not going to do it again. I mean, Eddie Q came in and fixed everything, like Eddie does. He's Mr. Fix-It, He goes in and solves all of these problems. And he did that. Now Apple is going to push new features, new services when they're ready to do it. And that's what we want. We expect more from Apple than we do any other company. If BlackBerry releases a phone that doesn't fall apart when you touch it, people cheer. But if Apple Come on, ready? It's true.
No, I was just thinking because we were all talking about this. Samsung put a fingerprint reader in their new phone, but it's the old style swipe fingerprint reader, and then they opened it up to developers. Touch ID, for example, it's not open to developers, and my understanding is because it's really hard to secure token spoofing when you start opening it up to third parties. So Apple's waiting until that's really secure, but Samsung opened it up, and I'm just wondering if they're going to see the same kind of scrutiny given their security system, that because Apple had like letters from senators and they had security groups that going after them the minute they announced that thing, and I just haven't seen that from their competitors, and I think that's the same thing you're talking about.
Well, it doesn't seem to matter. I mean, look at the recent SSL bug. Was it a bug? Yes. Was it serious? According to experts, yes. I don't know. I'm not an expert in that, so you know, maybe I'm not even here now. Maybe somebody else hijacked my computer and you're talking to them. But Apple fixed it within days. So, you know, chances are they already had a macOS update ready. They went back, fixed this bug, and then pushed everything live in a few days. That's pretty good, considering Windows, some bugs are open for years. I mean, they have Update Tuesday. It's like, you know, a circus. So to have something open for a few days, I don't think is a big deal. And you know, Android, 98% of the malware on mobile is on Android. So nobody that uses Android can even talk about Apple having a bug, a security flaw.
That was that thing that came out yesterday Apple published their updated security manual, and it details, I think for the first time, a lot of not just that they make things secure, but how they secure and how they encrypt iMessage and FaceTime and Siri and what they do with all your information. Yeah. And I was up for like an hour just watching Nick Arnott tear through that thing, which was pretty awesome. But their first sentence in that is that we are a secure operating system. And Gruber immediately contrasted that with Sundar, I'm going to mispronounce his last name, Pichai's comment that Android wasn't built security first; it was built for openness first, which is a huge contrast. Like the two, it's basically a fundamental difference in how both systems were architected.
Well, yeah. Again, people are not going to make their choice, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but people are not going to make their choice on an operating system based on what experts say about security. Are they?
I think that's so. The one thing I have, and I'm actually curious for Peter's opinion on this, is we got the iOS 7.0.6 patch really quickly because there was no incoming iOS update, so they just pushed that out. 10.9.2 was almost ready, so they folded it in, and technology wants to check that kind of stuff. You don't want to just put out a major new version and not give it a full testing because you might put even worse bugs than that. Who knows? But PR-wise, you want to push that out as fast as possible, and it seems like Apple took the sane approach. And I know it's probably highly debatable, but it took the same approach, and they let it go for the week, 2 days maybe, and they did it as part of a regular release cycle, so it was as solid as it could be. What's your take on that? Do you think that's reasonable? And just for Jim's thing, I don't know that much about security, but this was a bad bug, yes, but you had to be susceptible to a man-in-the-middle attack. Like someone had to want to get your stuff, and you had to put yourself on a network where they could get it in order for it to happen. So do you think it's better to err on the side of caution or to go fast?
That's where I think a lot of people are losing the forest through the trees. What you just said about the man-in-the-middle attack, and again, I'm going to go back to my retail experience. We've got people coming in off the street saying, the news says that my iPhone has a virus on it. That's all they understand. That's all they understand. They understand that the news said something bad about their iPhone and it's security related, and now hackers are looking at my email, and it's the iPhone's fault. People don't have a sophisticated understanding of this stuff. Christ, most of us in the tech business don't have a sophisticated understanding of what the hell a man-in-the-middle attack is or what SSL and TSL do. And this is what aggravates me about it so much. This is complicated stuff. So, yeah. Not only is it complicated stuff, but it irritates me even more that people start armchair quarterbacking how Apple is supposed to handle this. And the fact that a security patch wasn't out for OS X Mavericks at the exact same time as the 706 update was. It's ludicrous to me. They're different operating systems, different people working on the stuff, surely, and different things to test for. So I think Apple comported itself exactly the way it was supposed to. It didn't rush it. It didn't half-ass it. It didn't screw anything up. It got the security update out when it needed to, and it was a serious problem, but it wasn't something that was about to cause widespread failure of Macs across the internet. It wasn't something that
your computer wasn't going to melt in front of you.
Yeah, your computer wasn't going to explode because of this problem, you know?
So it's interesting because a lot of people, what disappointed me was people who I think should know better said it's just one line of code. But there's never just one line of code. Who knows what else has been built on top of that would suddenly start to fail if that code didn't fail. If that problem didn't exist. And Apple OS X is not, like a quick text editing program. It's an entire operating system. And I know we get called Apple apologists for saying stuff like this. But it is a non-trivial task. You have to patch an operating system, and it's not just a security update. Whether they should have chosen to do a separate one or not, you can debate that. But once it hit 10.9.2, it would have been worse if it was rushed out and there was a bigger problem in 10.9.2. I mean, the sacrifice that you would make to push it out 2 days early probably would not be worth it. I don't think any reasonable case can ever be made that if it's a zero-day exploit, if it's in the wild, if it's imminent danger, push that out. But once it's part of a release, you got to certify that release.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely right.
And that's exactly what we expect. Imagine we yell and say, okay, there's a security bug in OS X. We're not happy with Apple that it's there. I think we have every right not to be happy that it's there. But then Apple, within 6 hours, comes out with an update and fixes it, and all of a sudden it erases your drive, which has happened before. Yeah. Then how happy are we that Apple put it out in 6 hours? Not very. Then we kind of wish that they had waited a day or so.
We can reasonably ask ourselves and ask other people in the community, how did this get past Apple's gatekeepers in the first place? If this was such a glaringly simple problem, how come it took until now to figure it out, and how come it took until now to fix it? I think that's a completely reasonable question. It's also a question that we're not going to get an answer to because Apple doesn't let you behind the curtain. Apple does not want people understanding how the sausage is made. So we can ask these questions, but ultimately they're kind of rhetorical.
Although we did ask some QA people, and even the guy from Google, I think either he discovered it or he was mentioning it early on, was saying that it's easy to say they need a better process, but this is not. Again, this is complicated stuff. I think his solution was you'd have to build a secondary stack to compare it against, and they hadn't done that, and they were going to start doing that, but only because they'd found this problem in Apple stuff.
Right. So it's very easy, as I was saying before, to armchair quarterback this stuff. But the bottom line is Apple determined what the nature of the problem was, and they fixed it. And you may not be happy with their timetable. You may not be happy that it happened at all. But at least the stuff got fixed.
That's my biggest takeaway, Jim, from this is, and some people have said that if the coder hadn't tried to do everything in one line, if he'd used the brackets, if he'd used a different style of coding, it would have been easier to spot, and fine. But I think accidents are always going to happen. Every company, like servers are always going to go down. Accidents will always happen. To me, it's how a company deals with it that matters.
Well, talk to, and I'm sure that you did, I did too, and we have for a long time now, talk to any developer and ask them about software bugs. They happen. If it was the type of bug where anybody in the world could just come in and look at your computer and just, go into Google and type in Rennie Ritchie, and there's your computer, and you click a link and you're inside. Okay, that's far-fetched, but let's just say that you could do that. Yeah, okay, I'd be really mad with that. I'd be in your computer. I'm never going in Peter's computer. Never going in there.
He's seen what I do to my computers.
Yes. But we would be upset with that, and that would be a monster bug. But when you're talking about bugs that, yes, they're serious, but bugs that most people aren't really going to be affected by, and Apple takes a few days to figure it out and put out an update, I think we're fine.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting to me is the um, what's the right way to put this? The way that it's looked at. So, for example, Peter did a piece today on water resistance because the Galaxy S5 has water resistance, and a lot of people immediately say it would be nice if
Handling.
it would be nice if they had that. Beer resistance too, Jim. It can survive a little bit of beer exposure. But what I didn't like about a lot of the pieces was they just said it'd be nice to have it. What I liked about your piece, Peter, and not just because you wrote it for iMore, which I really like, but the fact that you made the case for it. You said these are the kind of cases people are buying now. This is the functionality that it provides, and this is what Apple would have to do it. Because I think quite often people just say X, Y, Z should happen, but they don't bother to do the actual work to see what it would take to achieve it.
I agree. That was a good article. I read that, and thought Peter did a great job in making that case. Because you're right. I mean, how many times do we read articles that say Apple needs to do these 5 things? You know what? Shut up. You don't know anything.
Well, that's the same thing to me. Like Apple needs NFC. NFC is a chipset, not a feature set. And you can go back to that Steve Jobs video where they talk about product versus technology. You could say Apple. I would really like Apple to do mobile payments, but you shouldn't have to care what chip is in the device. It should work for you.
And for all of those analysts that and I said at the time, NFC is a checklist item. That's all it is. Yes, this phone has NFC. Well, why doesn't the iPhone? Because there's nothing out there for NFC to work with. So you show me the person today, after years of NFC being talked about and released and everything else, that's using NFC on a daily basis so that it makes their life easier. It's not there. There is nobody.
I can't deny that as a Canadian, Jim, I do like that I can tap to pay at McDonald's and at Ultramar and at IGA and supermarkets. I don't care that it's NFC, but I do like the idea that one day I'll just be able to pay with my phone.
One day.
Yeah.
One day you will be able to, but that doesn't mean that a checkmark list feature needs to be in every phone 3 years ago.
Absolutely, especially given how certain carriers block them in different implementations, and I can't pay at Burger King but at McDonald's.
Yeah.
One last thing on the security thing before we move on. I know a lot of people put on their tinfoil hats and started saying that either Apple deliberately put this in for the NSA's benefit, the NSA hired a mole or snuck somebody in to put this in, or the NSA discovered this years ago and have been exploiting it up until now. It was in open source code. I don't know. I don't think I could find a tinfoil hat that big.
I don't think I could either. And maybe I'm just I'm too trusting, but I just think it was a mistake. Maybe it wasn't, and maybe the NSA was all over it. I don't think that's true, but some people do. But I'm not a big conspiracy theorist.
I subscribe to Hanlon's razor, which dictates, and I think Gruber quoted this in his treatise on what might have led up to this as well. Never attribute to malice what can be explained by stupidity.
Yeah.
I think it's a good way to live.
The first law of humanity. Never mind robotics.
You should read every story on the Loop with that in mind.
We're not mean. We're just dumb.
So a couple people have asked this. I watched it go by. Is iOS 7.1 beta? Is that fixed the SSL thing? The beta's under NDA, so there's not much you can talk about, but you should only be using that if you're a registered developer, and Apple tells you not to use it on your primary devices. They should be devices that you are using to test code, to do, to work on your apps, to work on reviews for when it eventually comes out. So the chances of a device with iOS 7.1 used the way it's intended to be used, being susceptible to a man-in-the-middle attack, is minimal. If you do use it despite Apple's warnings, and I also think you're grown up enough to be careful with it and take care of it until such time as you absolutely already know that it's secure.
Good.
It's the only advice I can give you.
That's well done.
If you want security, don't use anything. Don't touch anything.
A rock. Is a rock secure? Can I use a
No, absolutely not. Rocks aren't secure. They fall apart after a few billion years. They turn to dust.
Just ask Microsoft about their tablets.
That's
Damn
right.
entropy. So you're bringing us into Microsoft, and that's interesting. I haven't had your take on this yet, Jim. We've seen Steve Ballmer go. We've seen a new CEO come in. They've bought Nokia. They're rumored to once again be looking at BlackBerry because WhatsApp sold for $16 billion. So maybe BlackBerry Messenger is worth more than BlackBerry now. Nokia put out a Nokia X phone. I like it when Apple has really good competition because I think that it keeps everyone on their toes. But
Yeah.
it looks a little scattered and unfocused across the aisle right now.
Well, I think I don't know when it hasn't looked unfocused. Um, Look back to 2007 when Apple released the iPhone, and Ballmer laughed and said nobody would pay that much for the iPhone. This co-CEOs of BlackBerry said that it wouldn't affect their business any. The only one that didn't really laugh was Samsung, but that's because they were too busy copying it. There hasn't really ever been a whole lot of focus. There's been a whole lot of chasing and a whole lot of following. Samsung has tried to come out, and I give Samsung credit. They have made a gazillion dollars on the phone business in the last 7 years. So copying does work, kids.
We learned that in high school, didn't we, Jim?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. So there's a lot of people, a lot of companies that really don't know what the next move is because they don't have people that can see that far ahead. And really, that's where it all is. It's not what we're doing now. It's a problem that exists now that's going to get fixed with a new product in the future. And everybody seems to be looking at the phones today. By looking at the phones today, you've already put yourself behind.
It's not where the puck's going to be.
Yeah, Mr. Gretzky.
Rocker Chick was asking just about the last thing we were talking about. And this is where I think, Peter's comment about people running to a store saying, I've got a virus because of this bug. I think this is where mainstream media fails. She's asking, has the go-to fail bug done any real lasting damage to Apple's brand with the general public or the tech press? And oftentimes it's not the bug that does the damage, but it's the really shoddy reporting on it that does the damage.
And Rocker Chick, who I know from Twitter, so hi. Yeah, it's people like Forbes and Bloomberg, and when they come out with these stories about this devastating bug, and then Peter gets inundated with calls and people are coming into the store saying, "Oh my God, I don't even want to touch the phone because it's dirty and
it'll burn my hand like acid."
That's the problem. Where on the other hand, they leave 98% of the malware on Android. They don't even care about that. Forget that. But
Yeah,
if it's Apple, then they're going to make a big deal out of it. And I don't think Apple's reputation has been hurt, but we have to understand that the people listening to this show and the three of us, we're into this. We follow technology all the time. If you really want to know what the general public thinks, ask your mother.
She calls me, Jim. She calls me in a panic about the news stories.
Mine.
Don't talk about my mother.
Ask your mother. Ask your neighbor that doesn't really care about technology and watches the evening news or reads the newspaper. That's what the average person thinks. It's not what you and I think because we know enough, and the people listening to the show know enough to say, "Wait a minute, that doesn't seem right." And there's a big difference.
I think one of the problems here, Peter, is that news in general has switched from being an information service to an attention grab, where they just want to get your eyeballs, but they don't care about informing them. Now, I don't mind the attention thing. Like I'm happy. I want people to read what I write too, but I think you can have a balance. Like even if you have a crazy headline, if I click on it, at least give me good information after I click on it. If you get my attention, make me smarter for having given it to you.
Yeah.
One would hope that that's the ultimate goal, but unfortunately it isn't, and you're absolutely right. It is an attention grab, and there's very little that we can do about that, because it used to be that the news cycle would be, whatever was printed every day in the newspaper, and then it was whatever was on the evening news, and then the 24-hour news cycle came around with cable television and CNN and so on. And now and now the news cycle is driven by what's happening on Twitter. Yeah. The news cycle is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So are people's attention spans, and accordingly, people's ability to actually to process information. And I'm not just talking about the people who are receiving the information through social media and talking about it and so on. I'm talking about the people who are actually writing the information. We're not given time to analyze. We're not given time to break down what this means, or what's even happening. We're under constant pressure to publish and to get that news out, and I think it hurts everybody collectively, because we're not given an opportunity to figure out what we're talking about in any meaningful way.
But that's where some sites can make a business out of doing that type of analysis and decent stories, and I think iMore is certainly one of the few that does that. And Rennie, you and I have talked about this before. Where those articles that you guys do, the how-tos, how to turn Wi-Fi off on your iPhone. For many people, very simple thing. But for a lot of people, they don't know how. They don't know how to change the wallpaper. And it's not because they're stupid. It's because they just haven't been shown. So those articles are really good. Peter's story today about the waterproof. Being able to take the time to write something that's thought out enough where you can put a good point to it. Those are the worthwhile articles, and clearly it works for you guys because you have a business surrounding it. I mean, you still need to do the breaking stuff, but.
So, there's a couple of things I want to take apart of that. One is, we get accused of link bait sometimes, and I always try to say that people don't understand these terms very well. Link bait is when you write something that you want somebody to link to. I don't care if people link to the stuff or not. I think they often mean clickbait, which is I want someone to click on the link. But the bait part means that I'm trying to trick you. I want you to click on that link, but I'm going to give you something for clicking on it. And someone could do the same thing with the loop. They can say, oh, Jim put a curse word in this article to get attention. But I click on it, and it's worth my attention, and that's an absolutely fair exchange.
Well, usually, I mean, it has to be really bad if I'm going to put a curse word in the headline of an article. Or really good, yeah. But, that's one of those things, those stories that even if you didn't look at it from me, and you clicked and read the story, you would say a curse word under your breath because it's just that bad.
My favorite, though, is that some of the links on the loop, like if it says like WTF Samsung or something, you look at the slug and it's WTF Samsung number 9 or something. Because it's been...
Yeah.
This just got several.
The latest in our WTF Samsung series.
That's true. That's pretty funny.
There was a scene from The West Wing, and I'm a big West Wing fan, but there was a scene when they did the presidential debates, and they had Bartlett up on the stage, and his opponent said, oh, taxes are too high, what are you going to do? And Bartlett said, that's it, that's the 10-word answer. Your taxes are so high, so are mine, but what are you going to do about it? Those are the next 10 words. You tell me that, and I'll quit right now. Being president is not about easy answers, and when it is, there's usually a body count involved. Everything else has nuance. And I think that's what gets lost in the rapid-fire coverage. I'm not opposed to it. I'm not opposed to great headlines. I think a lot of sites that I don't like the writing for actually have better headlines. I just wish that they would do the next 10 words, because as a reader, I want to know what those are.
Yep. Well, and that's, when I link to something, it's and Peter knows this all too well, that it's something that's interesting. In one way or another, it's interesting. And for the ones that have the curse words in it, it's because I'm actually sitting there on my computer, shaking the screen, cursing at the story. It's funny, but being the boss, I'm able to write those. I can write those types of headlines.
Jim, can I put this word in the headline? Yes, you can, Jim.
Yes. I know it's bad when I'm cursing at the screen myself when I see something. You just. Really?
Yeah, I saw a couple of those. There's a couple of those Apple has to do this in 5 easy steps. A couple of the questions went by. I want to go to address it to Jim. One of the questions, and I forgive me, I don't know if it was Beck Jr. 25 or somebody else who asked it. They were curious when you said your list of iWatch things. I mean, I know, for example, my sister, she's a psychologist at Ottawa Hospital, and I gave her the Pebble for Christmas, and she loves that she can leave her phone in the office now, walk around with that and her pages, because they use SMS, they basically use iMessage or SMS to page them now, comes to her watch, so she doesn't have to carry the phone with her anymore. So she would love an iWatch that basically just did notification forwarding. And their question was, are there anything that you would love an iWatch or an Apple wearable to do for you?
You know, this may be one of those situations where the iWatch that I think of is actually maybe the iPhone 4. You know, not the original iPhone. So I want an iWatch to be able to recognize where I am, and to be able to control devices, control the environment that I'm in. You know, and there are lots of different environments now. It's not just, before there was home, there was the car. You know, maybe you're outside or whatever. But now I think the environments are starting to become even narrower to rooms. You know, I'm in my studio, so I want this to happen. Or I'm in the kitchen now, and this is what I want to happen. And you know, the same with the car. I think that the way that Apple is looking at sensors and medical experts and you know, physical type exercise and things is very interesting. You know, and what could happen there. Not being one that exercises much, I probably won't use those features. But
At least you can see how close you're getting to a heart attack.
we want an iWatch that spurts Tim Horton donuts at us. That's the kind of
Ooh,
that
Timbits.
The heart rate sensor for mine would probably be, you know, why are you even still alive?
You would explode the watch,
Yeah.
right?
You should have been dead 10 years ago.
Put the watch on, boom.
So that's what I think of an iWatch. And maybe, you know, we talk about people looking at the iWatch as too futuristic. And I'm trying not to do that. I'm trying not to be too futuristic with what I would like to see. These aren't necessarily my expectations, but what I would like to see. I mean, when you talk about, you know, I want to shoot lasers out of my iWatch and stuff because that's what I see in Star Trek. Well, you know, that's just being silly. But I think that there are ways through iPods, iPads, iPhones, Apple TVs, and other devices that they have coming out, Bluetooth in the car, navigation systems. I think that there are ways that Apple could help us in each of these narrow zones that we have in our lives. And that's what I would like to see.
I think you and I have spoken about the future of sensors before, and it's incredibly exciting. And I think you hit it on the head exactly when you said the iPhone 4, because you know, Apple is working 3-4 years ahead on these devices. We're waiting for, you know, this year's iPhone. They're working on 3 to 4 year iPhones. Yeah. Sort of the iPad Air was the dream when the first iPad came out. iPhone 4 was the dream when the first iPhone came out. And I think people have to be careful to set their expectations accordingly. We're going to get the original iPhone, the original iPad of iWatches, but then year after year after year, all this sort of medical stuff that we're seeing and sensor stuff that we're seeing, and the sort of stuff we're seeing in iOS 7, where the interface is being separated from the device, they're no longer, you know, locked together. I think that's going to get really interesting.
I think what the fair comparison would be for people not to compare a future Apple device against their expectations, which, you know, are always unruly and way out there, but to compare it against a similar product like the Galaxy Gear and compare Apple's product with that product, because they both had the same information. They both had, you know, a gazillion dollars to spend on research and development, and they both had access to the same technologies. So what's the difference between the two? That's the comparison that I think that really matters for consumers.
I think you're absolutely spot on, and I think that the choice is like, Apple is a focused company. They're not going to try and do everything badly. Like we said to the first iWatch, they'll pick a couple things that they think are going to be killer features they can knock out of the park. Like the original iPhone, it was the interface. With the original iPad, there was that case that Steve Jobs made when he got up on stage and said, "This is the reason this can exist. This is the things that it does better." And I can see Apple, focusing on what an iWatch is going to take to get people to wear it and to use it and to enjoy it and to make their lives better. And then building on that as a foundation.
Yeah, I mean, that's typically what Apple does. They need that foundation product, and I think that's one thing that they've been good at with the iPhone, with the iPad, with the Apple TV. Look how much the Apple TV has changed over the years.
That's what I was going to throw that to Pia. The chat room is going back and forth about Apple TV stuff, and you've written a couple articles about it. We've talked about it previously. I've been using the Apple TV a lot, and some of the stuff is not really apparent, and Ali's been doing a lot of really great Apple TV how-tos. For example, you can hold down the select button and be taken right back to the main home screen, so you don't have to press it over and over again. You can hold it down and mark episodes as read or unread or all unread or whatever, and it's not that apparent. There's still no spotlight search if I want to find a movie, but I don't care if it's on Netflix or on iTunes or on Crunchyroll or something, regardless of whether Apple makes a Comcast DVR or not. I think there's a lot of interesting things that they can still do with that product, but until they give you that unless and until they can give you that live sports and live news, I think it's still going to be an input 1 or input 2 device, and I think I'm really okay with that.
I agree with you, Renee, and let me just say something for the record. I don't give a damn what the next Apple TV looks like. There's been so much wasted energy speculating on what kind of design language the Apple TV is going to use, and it is such an irrelevant question. It's such an irrelevant question. The question is not what the Apple TV is going to look like. It's what it's going to do. So whether or not it's a Taurus that looks like, a donut that just got dropped by the Mac Pro, or whether it looks fundamentally the same as the last 2 generations of Apple TV, or what have you, it doesn't matter. The question is, how does it enhance your TV viewing experience? And I think for many of us, the Apple TV has kind of worked itself into a TV viewing experience that we may not have expected initially. I know that's certainly how it was for me and for a lot of other people who I've talked to about it. Where we might have thought initially, okay, we're going to use the Apple TV to watch movies and TV shows that we get from iTunes, and then you find out, wait a minute, I can do Netflix on it too, or one of the new channels that Apple's added more recently. The big win for me last year was Crunchyroll. Crunchyroll totally changed how I used my Apple TV, because all of a sudden I was able to watch, the Japanese anime that not just I like to watch, but that my entire family likes to watch. And now we use it in different ways too. We use it to watch YouTube videos. We use it for all sorts of things.
I watch tons of Netflix. I just watch entire series one after the other.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I agree. I mean, the big win for me with Apple TV was when they did start bringing things like Netflix on, because I had a Roku, and if I wanted to watch Netflix, I'd go over to that, and then you come in. But with it all on Apple TV, it makes it a more useful device.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you pointed out, Renee, it's still not a primary TV watching device, at least not for a lot of people. Certainly some people have. Some people have cut the cord with their cable company. Maybe they're only paying their cable company for broadband access, and they're content to use the Apple TV for whatever viewing they've got. I know I can't do that because I'm too hooked on the regular stream of stuff from all the networks that I like to watch, whether it's HBO or Showtime or FX or God knows I would. I have to have my my NESN, my New England Sports Network, so I can yell at Jim about what happened with the Bruins last night.
I've heard of the Bruins.
Right.
Bruins,
so
baby.
That's not what you were telling me in chat earlier today, Renee. You damn liar. So it's really interesting how it's evolved. But one thing that it hasn't done is become a primary viewing device, and I think that expecting the Apple TV to become a primary viewing device is probably barking up the wrong tree, because the media market for TV and movie content is so different than it was for the music industry when Apple started to pick up a lot of traction with iTunes and the iPod. And we keep waiting for Apple TV to fundamentally disrupt that market, and I don't think it's going to happen. I think the gatekeepers have put up way too much resistance to let that happen now or anytime in the near future.
Okay,
sorry, go ahead.
Peter, what is the thing that's going to make it a primary viewing device? Is it going to be live TV, or is it going to be the fact that you can have access to stations that you can subscribe to?
I think that that's more the thing that would make it a primary viewing device. I think that live TV is important for a certain segment of the population, but not for everyone. Many of us, have gotten very accustomed to time shifting. Certainly that's generational. Yeah. That we just record whatever it is that we're going to watch and then just watch it later whenever we can. So I think that that ability to subscribe a la carte to the stuff that we want and toss the stuff by the wayside that we don't, I think will make a big difference. But I don't think it's going to happen the way that we want it to, and I don't think it's going to be as inexpensive as we'd like to see it.
Well, look at the WWE channel. What is it, $100 a year, $120 a year or something?
Well, NHL Game Center is like $150 a year.
Yeah, but it's the same cost as on TV.
Sure.
And some people just want to watch Judge Judy and Dr. Phil all day. I mean, we're not exactly the normal audience here either.
That's a very good point.
My question would be, how much is Showtime going to be?
Yeah, or HBO independent of your cable company.
Right. Can
Exactly.
I buy Showtime?
Are you going to be willing to pay $30 a month for unlimited access to HBO?
I don't know. That's a tough one. I mean, we would all like to see it at $5.
Yeah.
But. Can you afford to buy Showtime and USA and HBO and then some of the networks too to make your TV watching similar to what it is now? I don't know that.
I don't know what it is in Nova Scotia, Jim, but I cut my cable cord 2 years ago. But Videotron, which is a local cable company, it was $10 for a basic cable package, which included like CTV, CBC, Global, all the. That's almost like the Canadian versions of ABC, NBC, and CBS. And then after that, you could get an a la carte program where it was $20 for 20 channels or $30 for 30 channels. You could pick any of the ones that you wanted, and then you could get like an HBO pack for $10 or something else pack for certain money. And I'd like to see that model on the Apple TV because that wouldn't bother me at all.
Yeah, that's what I want to see too. So I can buy HBO and I can buy maybe a select number of channels for this much money. The problem is that they always stick in like one good channel in amongst three crappy ones.
Well, that's why I like this because Videotron didn't have bundles. You could just pick literally like they did have Canadian content that was described by the government. Like you had to have more Canadian channels. But BBC Canada is almost identical to BBC US. It just has Canadian ads, so I'm fine with that. Yeah. And I could literally pick any 30 channels for $30, and I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah. Now see that I would love that on Apple TV. I would cut the cable so quick it'd be gone.
Which is why Comcast is doing what they're doing, right, Peter?
That's exactly right. I mean, Comcast makes me subscribe to, 12 channels of golf. I don't need to watch high golf in Spanish, for God's sake, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But I'm surprised sometimes, with and here's the thing, a lot of it is exposure. A lot of it is finding stuff that I wouldn't have known about otherwise. And my wife Bonnie is particularly good at this. She uses services like it was GetGlue, whatever the hell GetGlue is called this week, to be exposed to new material that she might be interested in based on her viewing habits. And it's channels that I've never heard of before that we just happen to get. That sort of stuff would be lost to me if I was only, cherry picking the 30 channels or so that I watch most frequently. So there's a danger there, I guess, is what I'm saying, in narrowing your focus to only that which you think is important. You may end up missing stuff that might be enlightening or might be entertaining or might be interesting to you and might open you up to new experiences. I mean, open you up to new experiences, Christ. We're talking about television. We're not talking about bungee jumping.
I don't want to be opened up to new experiences.
All right, the last question I got is from Xavier Poirot. He's asking.
I love
do you-
Poro.
He's asking if we expect the release schedule for Apple to be the same this year as it was for the last 2 years. In other words, most of the products released in September or October. I'm curious for your thoughts on this, Jim, but I don't think Apple ever built, I don't think they have an iPhone sitting there ready now and they're going to wait 6 months to release it. Apple sprints so hard. Like if you look at them at WWDC, if you look at the availability of Retina iPad minis, they sprint to that finish line and they barely get there in time. I think that we will see Apple products as soon as they're ready, and it's not easy to make a new iPhone every year.
No, I think the schedule will remain the same with one caveat, and that's if they have a major game-changing product. That will get its own. When that will come, we don't know. But, maybe they don't have one this year. We don't know that either.
They have to or they're doomed.
Apparently, yeah.
If there's no iEspresso maker this year, Jim, it's...
I would expect that everything is going to remain the same unless there's something else that's really big. And I wouldn't expect that to be a Mac or, a new product.
Yeah.
And a new product would get its own.
I think that's absolutely right. I think also if, by wild example, if there's going to be a new SDK for an existing product, they'd probably give developers a little bit of time to get comfortable with that, like they did with the iPad and the iPhone and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
Jim, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a delight when you're here.
I love doing it. You guys
Can you
are
tell
great.
people where they can find you on the internet?
You can find me at loopinsight.com for the website and jdalrymple on Twitter.
And they can also find you on Amplified on 5x5 Network every week.
Yes.
And you can actually keep track of Jim's laughter on that show. It's a very good way to predict how entertained he is by the weekly news. Peter, where can people find you?
People can find me on Twitter at Flarg, Flargh, on iMore.com, and sometimes in the bushes outside their house.
Peter's Google. Anthropomorphized Google. Google Kaiju. How's that?
There we go, yes.
You can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find me at imore.com. Just a little programming note. We do love it when you join us here live. We're here every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. I believe that translates into 9 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. The video version of this podcast is currently only available on YouTube because we're switching hosts for the iTunes version of the video podcast. And I apologize that it's taking so long, but it turns out to be difficult to find one to test it and to make sure you're really happy with it, because a lot of people complained about how slow our old one was. We want to make sure the new one is really good, but I'll let everybody know as soon as that starts working again. But in the meantime, you can subscribe to the audio version on iTunes, catch the video version on YouTube, and for more information on all of our shows, you can just go to mobilenations.com. Peter, Jim, thank you guys so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And thank you, live chat room. You guys are awesome, handsome, talented, I don't know, Canadian, some of you. Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you so much, Peter.
No
See
problem.
you guys. It's time, right?
Whenever you're ready, sir.
Okay, just a sec. Let me put this back.
I'm just going to eat my honey bun.
So many entendres. I don't even know if that's double. That might have been triple or quadruple.
It's a double entendre in my mouth.